Recently, according to the reporting of journalist Olena Chernyaeva, a concerned visitor to an Odesa biopark started a social media campaign in defense of a little tiger cub being kept at the park. The cub needs to sleep and rest much of the day in order for it to develop properly. But it has been used by the park as an attraction for visitors. It has been kept loose in a small courtyard where visitors have been free to bother it. The little tiger has shown visible signs of stress. It has been used as a prop for visitors who want to take photographs with it, and as a toy, sometimes for many hours at a stretch in the hot sun.
Наслідків є декілька. По-перше, це смерть. Дуже багато статистики підтверджує, що в таких умовах звірі не живуть довго. По-друге, стрес. Цей стрес, він призводить до того, що тварина може проявити агресію у будь-яку хвилину.
According to the reporting of journalist Oksana Nechepurenko, in the first attempt of its kind in the Kharkiv district, biologists have released into the wild a pair of bobak marmots that were born and raised in captivity. In the past, bobak marmots were quite common in the steppes of the Kharkiv and Luhansk districts. But in recent years, they became a threatened species in these regions. Biologists hope to re-establish the bobak marmot population there. For these two marmots, a special burrow was prepared for their release.
Я думаю, дня через 3 он уже сделает где-то вертикальный выход какой-то другой. Вот за это время он привыкнет к этой территории и будет считать эту территорию своим домом.
So, what do a tiger cub and a couple of marmots have to do with wider issues relating to Ukraine? Well, let's see. These stories illustrate the general human tendency to collect and/or capture exotic animals, while allowing native or familiar animals to run free. On July 16th, US President Donald Trump and President of Russia Vladimir Putin undertook a historic meeting in Helsinki, Finland. This meeting left observers, for the most part, scratching their heads, rolling their eyes, or, at the other end of the spectrum, simply outraged. And of course, they have been scrambling to come up with theories regarding the summit, mostly on the basis of politics. To me, it simply seems that President Trump is a collector. Former President of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, for example, collected and kept a menagerie of exotic animals on his private estate. In a similar way, Donald Trump seems to want a menagerie of his own, of exotic public figures to keep in an imaginary enclosure. He started his collection with the mysterious and enigmatic Supreme Leader of North Korea, the tiger Kim Jong-un, in June. And now he has tried his luck at securing the intransigent and slippery Russian president, the bear Vladimir Putin. I would imagine that Trump is, naturally, now itching to train Putin and to teach him to do tricks. So we Ukrainians should probably focus not only on speaking up about the meeting, but also on making sure that if Trump won't detach himself from Putin, that at least his quote-unquote training of Putin will be in the interest of Ukraine and human rights. Coincidentally, Trump's summit with Putin occurred almost exactly on the 43rd anniversary of the 1975 Helsinki Summit of Nations. That summit intended to create dialogue between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was the height of the Cold War. Interestingly, the US Secretary of State at that time was Henry Kissinger. His pet policy was détente with the Soviet Union, and he continues to support dialogue with Russia even today. This in and of itself isn't necessarily problematic, except that he seems to have an oddly shifting position with regard to the Crimea, for instance. In addition, at the 1975 summit, the Soviet Union, along with 34 other nations, including the United States, signed the final act in which the signatories agreed to respect human rights and territorial integrity. Soon after the signing, the Soviet Union came under fire and scrutiny for its human rights abuses, most notably for the crushing of the Helsinki groups, organizations of former dissidents and reform-minded individuals, including many prominent Ukrainians, whose mission was to keep tabs on the various levels of Soviet government with regard to their adherence to human rights protections. When we fast forward to today, we see the Russian government holding Ukrainian political prisoners and playing chess with their lives. So how can Kissinger not question his détente position with regard to Russia, when he has personally witnessed, at the very least, 43 years of treachery and broken promises on the part of the Soviet and Russian governments, especially in the area of human rights? I think that if his approach has been one of the end justifying the means, it is rather perplexing, since the quote-unquote end was never even realized. Long-standing good or even useful relations between Russia and the United States were not secured. There was just a brief lull of approximately 20 years after the breakup of the Soviet Union, during which, it seems, all sorts of cozy and subterranean East-West alliances occurred, the details of which have become part of today's news cycle. Kissinger does not seem to be a collector like Trump. I think that his motivations should be studied, since even in his 90s and through like-minded individuals, he continues to be an important and powerful voice in the matter of US-Russia relations. So, coming back to where we started, and staying with the issue of human rights, I have a very simple message for President Putin, who is a collector of sorts. The dozens of Ukrainian political prisoners who are presently being held by Russia are not exotic tiger cubs for you to hold. Please release them, like the marmots, back into their indigenous environment, Ukraine. And Crimea is also not a tiger cub that you can keep and play with. So please leave it alone and return it to its rightful government of Ukraine. I'm Tania Stech, and this was Ukraine in a News.
Канал 1+1 тепер доступний на Bell International Programming.